Kapila Muni is mentioning here, Bhukta Bhoga Parityakta. Bhukta means that which is enjoyed. Bhukta Bhoga Parityakta. In the material world, everyone wants to enjoy. There are various objects of senses. There are various objects of senses that we would like to enjoy. Because living being wants to always enjoy. But here, Lord Kapila says, Bhukta Bhoga Parityakta. He is asking us to Parityakta. Parityakta means giving up or renouncing. Tyaktva. Here he is mentioning Parityakta. We have heard Pariprashnena. Pariprashna means intensely, eagerly questioning. And here, similarly, we can see Parityakta here. Parityakta means not that you give up once. How you have to give up with an intense desire to give it up. Not a half-hearted. Bhukta Bhoga Parityakta. Then what has to be, what is next? How to give up? Drishta dosha cha nityashaha. How to give up that? Because to give up, there has to be a basis. On what grounds he will be giving it up? Drishta dosha cha nityashaha. Drishta dosha. Dosha means faultiness. Faultiness in what? Faultiness in his own desire of lording it over material nature. Bhukta Bhoga. So that means this state of Bhukta Bhoga is a faulty situation, which someone who wants to cross over the material nature, he has to discover this faulty nature of one's own self. So in the spiritual advancement also, here it is mentioned, one has to find fault with his own self, with his own position. But in the perverted situation, we try to find fault in others. That is a natural, there is a natural tendency to find fault in the material world. We every time, whatever we see in this world, the arrangements that is there, we see some fault in that. So identifying the fault is nothing new for the living being. But here, if the same tendency to find the fault can be put on one's own self, and specifically the fault with respect to one's faulty position that with one who has taken up in the form of enjoying this material world, that can help him to cross over this material world. So that's what we see here. Dushta dosha cha nityashaha. Nityashaha, it has to be done always. It's a constant process. It's a constant endeavor. And what happens when someone is able to discover his faultiness, or someone is able to discover the fault in enjoying this material world or lording it over the material nature? Na ishwarasya ashubham dhatte. Na ishwarasya. So he becomes independent. Ishwarasya, Prabhupada translates here as of the independent. Ishvara means controller, we know that. But the position of Ishvara is that he is independent. And the living being also is here referred as independent. That Prabhupada very nicely explains in the purport that why the living being is addressed here as independent. So someone who could find this fault in his position of lording over material nature, Kapila Muni says here, Ishwarasya Ashubham Dhatte. Ashubham means harm. Na Ishwarasya Ashubham. It does not harm. Who does not harm? Then she does not inflict the miseries on the living being, one who is able to dushta dosha, one who is able to see the fault in the situation of one's own situation of lording over material nature. And because of this, what would be the position of the living being is further Kapila Muni describes. Sve mahimni stitasya cha. Sve mahimni. He becomes independent, and at the same time he comes to a glorious position. Mahimni means mahima. We know the word mahima. Mahima means glory. So that is the position of a living being. One who is able to find a fault, one who is able to discover the fault in desiring to lord over the material nature. And for such living being, he is able to become independent, and his glory becomes glorious. So this is a very important verse where Kapila Muni is answering to the question posed by Devahuti. She had asked a few important questions in the previous verses, and this is a direct reply to that question. In the text number 17, actually, Devahuti questions Kapila Muni, asking him, what is a remedy for living being to get out of this influence of the material nature? She questions, my dear Brahmana, does material nature ever give release to the spirit soul? Since one is attracted to other eternally, how is their separation possible? This is her question. This is a very natural question after understanding the nature of the living being, the nature of material energy, because previous to this, Kapila Muni explained how the living being is binded in this material world. So consequently, obviously, Devahuti is questioning here, that how is it possible for the living being to come out of the clutches of the material nature? Because apparently it looks like that the living being is constantly under the grip, under the control of the material nature. So she is asking an important question. How is it ever possible for the living being to get released from the material nature, from the grip of the material nature? Bhaktivedanta Thakura says, Anadi janma karma phale, podi bhavar nara jale, tari bhore na koi upay. So from time immemorial, the living being is caught up under the grip of the material nature. And there is no hope how to get out of this grip. Tari bhore na koi upay. So exactly Devahuti is saying the same thing. How to get out of? Because apparently it's difficult to separate. However, how is it possible to get a separation from material nature? Because her bondage is so strict and stringent, it is very quite obvious that unable to come out of the grip. Like someone who has fallen inside the well, he has no hope how to come out of the well, and the deep well. How much ever he puts an attempt, it's impossible for him to. That is the kind of situation that we are all in, and that's what Mother Devahuti is questioning. And the Maya, she tries to control. She controls the living being. She captures the living being by making them forgetful of Krishna. Krishna bhuliya jiva bhogavansha kare. Nikatastha maya tare jhapatiya dhare. Jhapatiya means just capture. The word jhapatiya is very important. Jhapatiya means capture in a way that there cannot be no release. We see sometimes a cat when it is capturing a rat, it is fully under the control of the cat. It will wither, thither, hither. It will try to get out. Not possible. So that is exactly the position of living being under the control of material nature. And this is because of forgetfulness of Krishna and bhogavansha kare. Enjoying this material world or lording it over the material nature. And Bhagavatam exactly describes all this important information. In the Bhagavatam, we see the position of the living being is explained and how it is caught up in this material world. And Bhagavatam also explains about how the spiritual energy is an important aspect where the living being has to seek shelter. And spiritual energy not just exists in the spiritual world, but the spiritual energy also exists in the material world also, in the form of devotional service. And that is what exactly Kapila Muni is explaining in this verse, that simply by accepting the process of devotional service, one can get out of the clutches of the material nature. That is the only way. And further, Mother Devavati questions, and this question is very important because someone who has realized how to get that one has caught up under the material nature, influence of material nature, one is bonded by the material world, he may try various other methods of coming out of the material nature. Mother Devavati is mentioning here, even if the great fear of bondage is avoided by mental speculation and inquiry into fundamental principles, it may still appear again, since its cause has not ceased. So, devotional service is the only way of getting out of the clutches of material nature. She is narrowing down the answer of Kapila Muni. She is clearly telling, even before Kapila Muni could answer, that even the karma process or the jnana process, they also cannot help one to get out of the material nature. Although it may help temporarily, but it will not help them to cross over the material nature, because one will again come back under the grip of the material nature, even though he may partially succeed in getting out of the influence of material nature. So that is the important thing that Kapila Muni is trying to reveal. And Mother Devavati, by questioning, putting forth a very important question, she is making Kapila Muni to speak the importance of how to get out of the material nature. So one may question then, if the karma and jnana process, the other process are not important or not the absolute process of getting out of the material nature, then why at all these two processes are also parallelly in existence along with the existence of the process of devotional service? This is because these two processes, karma process and jnana process, are also the process of devotional service in the sense that these are all the mixed process of devotional service. There is a mixed devotional service. Bhakti, the definition of bhakti is that bhakti which is action which is free from karma and jnana. What is the slow verse which says where devotional service is free from karma and jnana? Sorry? Sarvopadi vinirmuktam. So, give up all the kind of upadhi, all other definitions of karma and jnana. So there is something called karma mishra bhakti, there is jnana mishra bhakti. So the other process exists because Krishna wants the living being to be given that freedom to exercise to a choice where it wants to take up the absolute process of coming out of material nature. He wants the living being to realize that this is the only way to get out of the material nature. And taking up to the process of karma mishra bhakti or jnana mishra bhakti is like holding on to the plug and you are trying to stop the fan. You have switched on the fan and you are trying to stop the fan when this plug is still on the board. So karma mishra bhakti, jnana mishra bhakti is a process of getting out of this material world while you are simultaneously attempting to lord over the material nature, because that process is also like an attempt to lord over the material nature, trying to enjoy the material world. So that is the faultiness that where Kapila Muni is explaining in this verse. And Kapila Muni, in this verse, he says, one has to discover the faultiness of one's desire to lord over the material nature. And this is the faultiness, that the tendency to lord over the material nature and trying to control the material possessions, the resources, the senses, is a faultiness that one has to discover. So in the purport, further Prabhupada says that the living being, the living entity is not actually the enjoyer of the material resources. He further explains what is this desire of lording the material nature. Originally, the living being is not actually the enjoyer of material resources. This is a fact. But still, we see the living being is trying to lord over the material nature. This is because of the misunderstanding. The misunderstanding that the enjoyment means the only way of enjoying is enjoying the material resources. It has no connection with the material resources, because spirit soul is spirit in nature. It has nothing to do with matter. And somehow it comes under a misunderstanding that to seek enjoyment and to seek pleasure and to experience that pleasure, one has to lord over the material resources. And this is because of the same reason, because the living being forgets its position as a servant of the Lord. Krishna bhuliya jiva bhoga vancha kare. It loses its position, its spiritual position of remaining in spiritual happiness. And it takes up to the process of material enjoyment. It takes up to the process of sense gratification. It takes up to the process of experiencing pleasure by engaging in sense gratification. But Bhagavad Gita says that such kind of pleasure is also a big illusion. It's the biggest illusion. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that this pleasure is a pleasure which has experienced through senses coming in contact with sense object. Matra sparsha stu kaunteya shitoshna sukha dukkhana. It is only because the senses experiencing some pleasure, it is because of the sense perception. When the object come in contact with the senses. And this sense pleasure is a source of misery also. Dukkha yonaya evate. Yahispam samsparshaja bhoga dukkha yonaya evate. It is also a source of great miseries for the living being. And adyantavantah kaunteya, it has end. Adyantavantah kaunteya Nateshu ramate buddha. An intelligent person will actually not get into seek for such kind of enjoyment which is arising out of some sense pleasure. Yahi samsparsha jab hoga. He does not get into such kind of pleasure which arises out of senses, coming in contact with sense objects. So this is what is the biggest fault in the process of material enjoyment. And this is what Kapila Muni is asking the living being to discover. And one will be able to discover this fault, because this discovery cannot happen on one's own strength. That is for sure. For this discovery, one has to seek guidance, one has to seek shelter under a bona fide spiritual master, one has to seek shelter of a sadhu. So unless one gets into a shelter of a bona fide spiritual master or a sadhu means one who is always engaged in devotional service. Sadhu reva samantavya bhajante maam ananya bhag. One who is continuously engaged in the devotional service, he is a sadhu. Because sadhu is able to discover that how the living being is engaged in lording it over the material resources. Because he has a clear understanding. He is a realized soul. He can see the faultiness of the living beings who are engaged in material sense gratification, in the process of lording over the material resources. So he is in a position to instruct the living beings. He is in a position to instruct how to get out of the influence of material nature. So that instruction, that means one has to be ready to accept the instructions of a sadhu. And one should know that by accepting the instructions, actually I will be able to come out of the influence of the material nature. And that instruction can come in different ways. Sometimes instructions we are ready to accept when it comes very sweetly, with a coated sweetness over the instruction. But that instruction can come in a different way. Just like Indra, when he offended the Vrajavasis, Krishna instructed him through a different way. He took the charge of punishing. He wanted to make him realize. So he took another way of instructing him. So a person who is receiving instruction, he cannot have a choice that how, in what way or in what form the instruction has to come to him. So instruction is an instruction. So that's where the role of subordination comes into place. A genuine seeker of relief from the material nature, influence of material nature, through the instructions of a sadhu, he will not have a preference. That instruction should come only in a way that is sweet to me to hear. In a palatable way, the instruction has to come to me. So that is the process how one can discover the faultiness in one's own desire in lording over the material nature. Further, Prabhupada says in the purport that someone who is attempting to lord over the material nature, ultimately what happens to him is that he will get frustrated. Because the living entity is not actually the enjoyer of material resources, his attempt to lord it over the material nature is at the ultimate issue frustrated. This frustration is because living being is actually spirit by nature. Lording over by the material nature, he cannot get the real enjoyment. So the result is that he will have to ultimately get into a state of frustration. Even Arjuna also experienced a similar frustration. After asking him to fight, Arjuna refused. And he said that I am perceiving things opposite to what I am, no, what I wanted. Viparitani nivittani cha pashyami. Viparitani pashyami Keshava. I am seeing things opposite to what I wanted to perceive. So, someone who is frustrated, he can do two things. Either he may refuse, he may think that no more enjoyment. I will no more enjoy now. I want to give up this process of enjoyment. But that process of giving up enjoyment cannot happen on one's own strength. Even though he may want to give up the frustration, still he will not be able to give up unless he takes up to the right process. And next, what can happen if someone is frustrated, that Prabhupada further explains, as a result of frustration, he desires more power than the ordinary living being. Because when someone is trying to lord over the material nature, he sees that material nature is becoming more strong. I want to control, but I am not able to exercise that control. So he feels that I need more power now. I need to capture more power. So that's why he desires more power. So what is next? Desire more power. First is to desire to lord over the material nature. Attempting to lord over the material nature, there is a frustration. So because there is a frustration, so he thinks that I need now more power. And he desires to, he works on how to get more power. So that's how someone will take up the process of the karma, Mishra Bhakti. In the process of karma, one performs a pious activity. And by the result of pious activity, there is a pious result. And by the pious result, one gets power to enjoy more. One desires to go to higher planetary system by performing pious activities. Because in the higher planetary system, there is more power to enjoy the material world. But there also the living being will be again frustrated. Or the living being may take up to the process of the Jnana Marga. That's what Prabhupada mentions here. As a result of frustration, he desires more power than the ordinary living being, and thus wants to merge into existence of the supreme enjoyer. Now, why he wants to merge into the supreme enjoyer, Krishna? Because Krishna is a master of the material nature. He has an absolute control over the material nature. That means by becoming Lord, by desiring to become Lord or desiring to become merged into the existence of Lord, one thinks that I can now also control the material nature. This is called this is the last snare of Maya. To seek more power over the control, to exercise more control over the material nature. So ultimately, the living being thinks, let me become God. Let me merge into the God. Let me merge into the Brahman effulgence of the Lord. For what? For enjoying the material nature again. In this way, he develops a plan for greater enjoyment. But there also, he'll become frustrated. Why? Because living being is originally spirit in nature. It can experience real happiness or enjoyment only through the process of devotional service. That's why in Chaitanya Charitamrita it is said, Karma Kanda, Gnana Kanda, Kevala Vishaya Bhanda. Krishna Bhakta Nishkama Ataeva Shanta. Only a devotee of Lord Krishna can be always remain in eternal happiness. So, being situated in the platform of devotional service is the highest platform where one can experience the original happiness of Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada says that being servant of the Lord is the greatest position. In the material world, if you ask someone to be servant, it will immediately a great indigestion for them to understand. But how can I be servant? Because we don't want to be servant in this material world, because the understanding of being a servant in this material world means he is exploited. He is looked upon like a slave. A servant is never seen in this material world as like enjoying. A servant is always seen like he is tormented, he is suffering. So that's why when we say become servant of Krishna, so it is sometimes not acceptable for a common man or less intelligent man. Like Prabhupada says here, a less intelligent man cannot understand the position of eternal servant of the Lord, because the word servant is used, they become confused. The confusion is that they, when the servant, the material understanding of a servant within this material world is superimposed over the spiritual understanding of the servant as a servant of Lord Krishna. So that is a misunderstanding, that is the confusion, and this is the less intelligence of the people of this material world. But Prabhupada says here that to be the servant of the Lord is a glorious position, is the greatest position. And Kapila Muni also says here, Sve Mahimni Stitasya Cha. He will become glorious in his position as becoming the servant of the Supreme Lord. And further, someone who becomes a servant of the Lord, Prabhupada says that he becomes independent. And Kapila Muni also says here, Na Ishwarasya Shubham Dhatte. He will become Ishvara. Ishvara in the sense, he becomes independent. Lord Krishna is also an Ishvara. He is a supreme Ishvara. He is a supreme independent. He is a supreme enjoyer. And the living being is also addressed here as Ishvara in the sense, he also becomes independent. In the sense that he no more becomes dependent on the material nature. Because Krishna is a supreme enjoyer and we are his part and parcel. So we as a tiny Ishvara, we also can experience that highest happiness in the service of Krishna. Krishna is unlimited, his service is unlimited. So the experience of happiness that is experienced through the process of devotional service is also unlimited, and hence the living being is called as an Ishvara, or who is independent. He no more has to be dependent on the material nature. He no more has to be dependent on the influence of the three modes of material nature. So that is the glorious position of a servant of Krishna. So one has to feel great about being a servant of Krishna. In the spiritual world, everyone is a servant of the Lord. So to enter into the spiritual world, one has to again try here in this material world, who have become the servant of Maya, to transfer oneself to the position of servant of Krishna. That is why Kapila Muni is saying here, Bhukta Bhoga Parityatva. One has to give up that position of being a servant of material nature. And even impersonalist also cannot experience the highest happiness that a bhakta can experience. Although Shankaracharya says that the Brahmananda is a Paramananda. Shankaracharya says Brahmananda Paramananda. The happiness of Brahmananda is the highest happiness. But the real Brahmananda is an Ananda which is experienced by a devotee by realizing his position as a servant of Krishna and rendering service unto Krishna, and the experience of pleasure, the Ananda, through that process is a real Brahmananda. So that's why even the impersonalist also cannot experience that highest happiness. And that's why Prabhupada says the difference between a devotee and an impersonalist is that an impersonalist tries to become one with the Supreme so that he can enjoy without impediment. His goal is to enjoy again without impediment. He doesn't want to. There is an impediment that is seen in the process of enjoyment. Impersonalists, although they are transcendentalists, they have self-realized, they have negated the matter, but their fault is that they still want to enjoy. And only a devotee can experience the highest transcendental happiness by remaining as a servant of Krishna, and that is the most glorified position of the living being, and that is possible if someone takes up to the instruction that is given by Kapila Muni in this verse, who is asking us to give up this tendency to lord over the material nature and discover Bhukta Bhoga Parityakta, Dushta Dosha. One has to constantly observe that in the tendency in one's own self to lord over the material nature. Even as a practitioner of spiritual life, as a sadhaka, we may not be still completely relieved from this tendency to lord over the material nature. But one has to discover this. One has to find the fault in one's own self. One has to be vigilant that am I trying to lord over through this pursuit of, it may be apparently externally a pursuit of a devotional service, but even in that one may have the tinge of lording over the material nature. And one has to discover that. And that discovery can happen if one is always under the constant care and guide and the shelter of a spiritual master and Vaishnavas. We'll stop here. Gantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki Nitai Gaura Prema.